1204, an army of Venetians and Frankish knights captured and sacked Constantinople, the ancient capital of the Byzantine Empire. History has remembered this event as the culmination of the Fourth Crusade. For many, the Fourth Crusade is to blame for the ultimate demise of the Byzantine Empire. This notion was popularized by Stephen Runciman, an author whose reliability is often questioned by present-day historians, but who remains an influential figure. Runciman argued that the Fourth Crusade delivered a fatal blow to the Byzantine Empire. After the Venetian Frankish conquest of Constantinople, the empire supposedly was too fragmented and damaged to ever fully recover. But is this true? Is there any real reason to believe that the Fourth Crusade was the decisive event that destroyed the Byzantine Empire? Indeed, is it possible that earlier developments ultimately ensured the downfall of Byzantium? Today on Real Crusades History, we'll examine this issue and try to answer the question, did the Fourth Crusade destroy the Byzantine Empire? Big thanks to Skillshare for sponsoring this video. Skillshare is a massive online community where you can learn real skills from professionals. As a YouTuber, Skillshare was instantly appealing to me. The first thing I did was take a look at some classes that dealt with video editing, like this class on creating animated maps with Martin Lehman. Since I use a lot of animated maps to illustrate historical events in my videos, Martin really got me started on a skill that I normally hire out to other creators. One thing about Skillshare is that you can save any classes that interest you, and then go back to them when you're ready to advance. I also found music production, creative writing, and graphic design. And check this out, the first 1,000 of my viewers to sign up through my link in the description will get a 1-month free trial of Skillshare, so you can start exploring your creativity today. So if you're ready to finally acquire that skill that will take you to the next level, click on my link below, sign up with Skillshare, and get started now. First of all, let's briefly review the history of the Fourth Crusade. The Fourth Crusade was called in 1198 by Pope Innocent III to restore Jerusalem and other territories in Palestine to Christian control. The target for the crusade was Egypt, the power center of the Ayyubid Sultan, who at the time controlled Jerusalem. The Frankish, or French leaders of the crusade, contracted the Republic of Venice to build a fleet and transport the Crusader army overseas to Egypt. However, as it turned out, many Crusaders ultimately chose to travel to the Holy Land by other means, and so the Frankish leaders ended up with a far smaller army assembling in Venice than they had originally anticipated. As a result, the Franks couldn't pay Venice's bill for their fleet. In 1202, Venice's leader, the Doge Enrico Dandolo, asked the Franks to fulfill their debt by helping Venice conquer Zara, a Christian city on the Adriatic Sea. In effect, Dandolo was asking the Crusaders to break their solemn vow by attacking a Christian town. The Frankish leaders agreed, resulting in many Crusaders abandoning the expedition in disgust and traveling to Palestine by other means. Ultimately, the Franks helped the Venetians take Zara in November of 1202. When the Pope heard about this, he excommunicated the Venetians and the Franks who'd taken part in the attack on Zara. This is a crucial moment in the history of the so-called Fourth Crusade, for at this point, it can no longer really be called a crusade. Once the Venetians and Franks attacked a Christian city and fell under the Pope's excommunication, their status as crusaders was null, and they were no longer engaged in a church-sanctioned crusade. It's therefore a bit misleading that the Fourth Crusade is even called the Fourth Crusade. Ultimately, the Franks who remained with the Doge and his Venetian fleet ended up attacking and conquering another Christian city, Constantinople. At this point, they set up a new Latin government, the Latin Empire of Constantinople. Meanwhile, the Byzantine Empire fragmented into 3 successor states centered in Nicaea, Trebizond, and Epirus. The Latin government of the Venetians and Franks would endure for several decades until the Byzantines recaptured Constantinople and re-established the Byzantine Empire in 1261. The Frankish-Venetian conquest of Constantinople in 1204 was one of the few times that this supremely well-defended city was taken by assault. But did 1204 really destroy the Byzantine Empire? What was the state of Byzantium before the Fourth Crusade? What other factors were at play? Potentially, it wasn't the Fourth Crusade that destroyed the Byzantine Empire. It was internal developments within Byzantium itself, going back several decades and arguably centuries. Crucially, the 1180s and the 1190s were a time when the Byzantine Empire was, in many ways, imploding. The culprits? A series of absolutely incompetent and even malicious rulers who rendered the ancient Byzantine Empire a mere husk of its former self. One must ask the question, why was it even possible for the Fourth Crusade to capture Constantinople? Throughout history, Constantinople had been impregnable. What was different in 1204? The answer lies further back in time. In 1180, Manuel Comnenus, ruler of the Byzantine Empire, died. Manuel had been a highly capable emperor. As it turned out, his death would spell disaster for Byzantium. Manuel left behind a child heir, Alexius II. In 1182, one of the late emperor's cousins, Andronicus Comnenus, assumed guardianship of young Alexius II. Andronicus was an unscrupulous scoundrel who in the past had tried to assassinate Manuel and had twice deserted to the Turks. Now, Andronicus launched a palace coup. He strangled to death the boy he was meant to guard and seized the throne for himself. Andronicus at once announced a fiercely anti-Western policy. Westerners, that is, Latin Christians, Catholic Christians from Western and Central Europe, were to receive no protection from the new emperor. As a result, the notorious massacre of the Latins took place in Constantinople in 1182, in which mobs slaughtered thousands of Latin Christian, mostly Italian, men, women, and children. Those Latin Christians who survived were sold as slaves to the Seljuk Turks of Rum. But Andronicus's power was short-lived. Rebellions rose across the empire to avenge the murdered Alexius II. In response, Andronicus launched a reign of terror. Suspecting everyone of plotting coups, he had countless tortured and murdered. Finally, a young nobleman called Isaac Angelus launched a successful revolt, which resulted in a crowd seizing and dismembering Andronicus. Isaac now took the throne, but the worst was yet to come. It was through this bloody affair that the Byzantine Empire passed into the hands of a family called Angeloi. 19th century British historian Charles Oman once wrote that in the history of the Byzantine Empire, that period covered by the reign of the two wretched Angeloi may be pronounced the most shameful. The particular evil of these two emperors, Isaac Angelus and Alexius Angelus, was that they treated the Byzantine state as a personal pleasure garden. They squandered the empire's resources on banquets and luxury while gutting the army and infrastructure. The roots of the problem were already in place. The Byzantine army had never recovered from the 11th century invasions of the Seljuk Turks, which deprived the empire of its traditional recruiting grounds in Asia Minor. From then on, the Byzantines relied chiefly on foreign-born mercenaries. Manuel Comnenus had maintained strict discipline among his mercenary forces, but the weak Isaac and Alexius Angelus were incapable of controlling the mercenary contingents within the empire. A state that depends on foreign mercenaries cannot allow them to grow disorderly, for they are liable to mutiny and plunder their host. Isaac Angelus hollowed out the civil administration by putting up its offices for auction. Rather than paying his officials, Isaac dispatched them into the provinces to make what profit they could by extorting the local populations. Alexius Angelus ran his administration just as poorly and refused all advice but from his entourage of greedy, conniving flatterers. In 1187, Isaac sent a letter to congratulate Saladin for conquering Jerusalem from the Crusaders. Isaac, on the other hand, was losing territory. The Bulgarians, frustrated with Constantinople's heavy taxation, rebelled in 1187 and established an independent kingdom. In response, Isaac appointed an army under a man named Bronnus, who, instead of fighting the Bulgarians, threw up the standard of rebellion and marched on Constantinople. The cowardly Isaac turned to another mercenary, the tough Western adventurer Conrad of Montferrat. Isaac bribed Conrad with his sister's hand and a hoard of gold. Conrad routed Bronnus, and, for the time, Isaac's throne was safe. However, the Bulgarians then proceeded to seize Nisus, Sofia, and Varna, right from under Isaac's nose. Meanwhile, another man named Isaac Comnenus, a relative of the late Emperor Manuel, launched his own rebellion and seized the wealthy island of Cyprus. Isaac Comnenus proclaimed himself emperor, ruler, absurdly, of the tiny empire of Cyprus. Such a farcical situation would have been unthinkable under previous emperors. But Isaac Angelus was powerless to discipline his namesake, much less retake Cyprus. Already the Byzantine Empire was fragmenting. In 1189, the Holy Roman Emperor, Frederick Barbarossa, sent messengers to Isaac Angelus asking that his army be allowed to pass peacefully through Byzantine lands on the way to join the Crusade in the Holy Land. Isaac agreed and even promised to help with provisions. But when Frederick arrived with his army, Isaac launched a series of attacks against the German Crusaders. Compelled to fight back, Frederick utterly defeated the ramshackle Byzantine forces. Frederick probably could have taken Constantinople himself, but he refused to continue a war against Christians when he'd vowed to crusade. The Holy Roman Emperor made peace with the humiliated Isaac and traveled on toward the Holy Land. Finally, Isaac Angelus fell victim to palace intrigue. His own brother, Alexius Angelus, executed a coup so successful that Isaac was captured, blinded, and packed away to a monastery before Isaac's supporters could show any resistance. Alexius Angelus now became Alexius III, and after dethroning his brother, never again achieved a single additional success. Alexius III continued his brother's mishandling of the Bulgarians, who went from strength to strength. He also blundered his way into a costly conflict with the Seljuk Turks of Iconium, and even stirred up trouble with the Holy Roman Emperor, Henry VI, who seemed ready to invade Byzantine lands when he died suddenly. All the while, Alexius III ignored the collapse of his frontiers and the victories of his enemies, indulging in lavish banquets and relaxing at his sunny villas on the Bosporus. Conditions were desperate in the countryside. Farmers were destitute, and local officials pilfered what little remained in the treasuries. Turkish raiders assailed the Anatolian farmlands with virtual impunity. Under the Angeloi, the old Byzantine administrative state had all but collapsed. But in 1203, a sudden calamity arose that even Alexius III could not ignore. The son of the blinded Isaac Angelus, also named Alexius, we'll call him Alexius IV from here on, had struck a deal with the Venetians and the Franks of the Fourth Crusade. Alexius IV asked the Crusaders to restore him to his father's throne in Constantinople. In return, Alexius IV promised to provide the Crusaders with the full support of the Byzantine Empire in their war against Egypt. Perhaps the Crusaders weren't aware of how little that support likely would have meant given the state of Byzantium at the time. It was as allies to young Alexius IV, the bitter son of the blinded Isaac Angelus, that the Venetians and Franks arrived at Constantinople, and so began the infamous climax of the Fourth Crusade. Now that you've learned about the history of the rule of the Angeloi, it should come as little surprise that Constantinople fell so easily in 1204. By the time the Fourth Crusade arrived before Constantinople, Isaac Angelus and Alexius III had themselves all but destroyed the Byzantine Empire. Their misrule had emptied the treasury, obliterated the institutions, and embittered the populace. Indeed, the empire had already begun to break apart and fragment in the 1180s and 1190s. The disease was already present, The events of 1204 were simply the culmination of a process that was well advanced. Other details surrounding the Fourth Crusade are worth debating. Arguably, it wasn't a crusade at all. It began as a crusade, but its participants were excommunicated after betraying their vows, at which point it ceased to be a crusade, but became merely a secular military expedition driven by the political interests of Venice. The number of crusaders who abandoned the expedition when it turned on Christians says much about how contemporary Latin Christians generally viewed the Crusades. But all that aside, it seems absurd to assert that the Fourth Crusade was the decisive event in the destruction of the Byzantine Empire. It was an event within that larger process, but it was only a single event, and a late one at that. The crucial damage was done earlier, and we can point to the period after the death of Manuel I Comnenus in 1180, followed by the rule of the Angeloi between 1185 and 1204 as the critical timeline in the empire's decay. Additionally, it should be pointed out that in literal fact, the Fourth Crusade was not the end of the Byzantine Empire. The assumption is that around this time, the Byzantine Empire was dealt such a serious blow that it never recovered, but recover it did to some extent. Indeed, the Byzantines had regained control of their capital by 1261, and the empire continued to exist for another 200 years or so. During this period, the real issue that confronted the Byzantines was unchanged since before the Fourth Crusade, the loss of Asia Minor, which was now dominated by the Turks. It should not surprise us that the real end of Byzantium came in 1453 with the conquest of the Ottoman Turks, whose ancestors had critically undermined Byzantine rule in Asia Minor centuries earlier. Thanks for watching. Now check out our full-length documentary on the life of Baldwin IV, the heroic leper king of Jerusalem. Click on the video linked on your screen to watch now. Please subscribe to this channel, hit the bell for notifications, and check us out on Patreon, where I answer questions and provide behind-the-scenes content. Click on the Patreon link in the description below.